All right. So, Kevin, what's your favorite story? You've been in development for a while. So, what's your favorite story about it?
Well, it's hard to pick one, but I think with Harvard Terrace, first thing that comes to mind when I say my favorite story one thing that rises to the top is this resident we had named Mr. Jennings,
Okay.
and we've owned Harvard Terrace since 1979. He predated that, so he lived at the apartment complex before that. And Mr. Jennings, like his life was Harvard Terrace and his relationship with our office. So when he'd come in and just visit, he'd bring snacks, we'd take him to lunch. But he lived there for decades. And I think it was really heartbreaking when he passed away. But he was able to live there on no income because we have a policy that as long as someone's living there, we don't increase their rent.
Okay.
So people have the opportunity, like if they're comfortable at Harvard Terrace, they can stay living there as long as they want and not feel like they're being squeezed out because their rents are going up too high. And Mr. Jennings would come in and he had a great relationship with Rolanda, who's our leasing manager.
Okay.
And he loved to come in and just chit chat. He'd bring snacks and they'd go to Brahms together. And I think it speaks to like, we had this community over there that's been there we've been operating for 50 years and people kind of appreciate that. It's not just like a lifeless business.
Yeah.
We have relationships with people and they have their phone numbers. But I mean, it was a really sad day, and there's actually a plaque in the courtyard of one of the sets of buildings that's dedicated to Mr. Jennings because he was a personality that lived there. And we have a lot of people like that. I mean, across the hallway, Mike lives there, and Mike he's a lifer. He's
Wow.
been there for over 40 years. His rent, if you look at his rent right now, you think it's the 1950s, which is rare.
Yeah. Yeah.
He receives our packages when we're not there on the weekends and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stories like that with Harvard Terrace where it makes you feel like you're having an impact that's greater than just running a business.
So that's Kevin Rice, and he is a developer here in Tulsa. He actually is our neighbor here at Christ Church on Harvard, just down the road with Harvard Terrace. He's had some other projects. You're going to hear about that. And what does it mean to be a landlord and in a city that has a housing crisis? What are they doing at Harvard Terrace and some of their other properties to be a business, but also to be generous landlords? And so this conversation with Kevin Rice, a local developer, I think will be just a great time for you to see things from another perspective as we continue to learn about what housing in our community is like. So, and as we're thinking about housing, and that's kind of what we've been having some conversations with, is having this affordable housing is key. So, for people who don't know, tell us a little bit. I mean, Harvard Terrace, kind of where it is, how many units it has, and you mentioned already that it has like 40. I mean, it's been a family business for 50 years. So yeah, just kind of give us a little bit of background for people who don't know anything about Harvard Terrace.
Harvard Terrace at 25th and Harvard. It's kind of tucked away in the neighborhood. It's 43 quadplexes, so there's 4 units per building.
Okay.
And we've had it in the family, been running it since 1979. My parents were running it by themselves in the beginning before they started having kids. I'm one of 4 kids, so they just couldn't do it all. My mom was trying to raise 4 boys while running that. She couldn't do it. So we had to eventually hire some more people to help them. And they're all the same type of unit, 2-bedroom, 1 bath.
Yep.
And we started a rehab project to that in 2011 to kind of bring some units. There was some deferred maintenance on some that we kind of mothballed, so they've been brought up to speed. And I mean, it's a really healthy community. It's very quiet, and we do have a ton of residents that have lived there a long time.
Well, and so I mean, you mentioned this policy to not raise the rent.
Yeah.
Which is when I was talking with Jeff James from Restore Hope, it was okay. The average rent prices went up 12% in Tulsa. So, So how did that policy get started?
I think it's just we are I think because we're local, we care about Tulsa. I mean, I live within a couple miles of Harvard Terrace. My parents live within a couple miles of Harvard Terrace. It's almost like holding the line a little bit because we've seen a lot of turnover in the apartment industry where people come in from out of state, whether it's California or the coast typically. And they're just trying to drain the most money they can out of a complex. And so we just like to work with people because last thing we want to do is just kick someone on the street.
Yeah.
Now, have we never evicted someone? No, but we try to work with people to make it work so that they can stay in because people go through tough times, especially in affordable housing.
Yeah.
If they are paying for affordable housing, they probably don't have a big margin between how much they're making, how much they're already spending on just necessities.
Yeah.
So we know there's things that impact people's lives that they it's just going to happen. That's life. So let's see if we can work with them to make housing is just a basic human need, and if we can work with people to keep them in there, I think that I don't know if you want to call it generosity or that cooperation, it works out. It's reciprocated in the end because people are just care more about you and where they live. So when they get back on their feet, they're more appreciative of it.
Yeah. Well, and I was, golly, like it would seem like retention is one of the key things for keeping a healthy community. If you got somebody good, you want to keep them in. And so doing that sort of stuff. So yeah, again, it's been a long time since like I've lived in anything like that. And probably for a lot of our people that may be watching this, like they haven't lived in an apartment. Like what is apartment community? What makes a good apartment community in what have you all done? What have you seen? What have you experienced?
Yeah. So I think part of it is just taking care of people's needs. When you live in an apartment, you're not responsible for a lot of things. Like if the air conditioning goes out, it's the landlord's responsibility to fix it.
Yeah.
And you think that's pretty simple, but in Tulsa, in a lot of communities probably, it's not that simple. And you have landlords where they just take a long time to fix things. We try to be the opposite of that. It's like, hey, we got to get things repaired and people living in comfort as quickly as we can. Another thing we try to do, and this is probably a theme about this whole conversation, is COVID changed a lot of things, but we try to have more, promote more community events. We're kind of a unique community in the fact that we have these 43 quadplexes. So we're not one big building. We don't have one giant community room. But we do put on regular events for our residents, parties and stuff. And sometimes that's well received, sometimes that's not. And that's evolved through COVID because you really do a lot of that stuff. Another thing is we don't have like a general meeting room, but we do have a community garden and a community orchard. So people are welcome to come in and plant their own plants. We plant some, and people come and it's actually pretty well received for people to come and just pick their own produce and grow. And so that's something we've grown over the years, bit by bit. We are a small business, so we don't have just money, just unlimited amount of funds. But we contribute to that a little bit every year.
Okay. So, and that's one of the things just that I'm like, there's this loneliness kind of epidemic is one of the ways that I've kind of, heard about it. And, Tulsa, I lived in Kentucky for a couple of years. It was a front yard culture. And I know you were in Tennessee. I don't know if it was the same way, but when I lived in Kentucky, porches were bigger, decks were smaller. In Tulsa, decks are bigger, right? Porches are small.
Right.
I don't have sidewalks in my neighborhood where I live, which is actually not too far from Harvard Terrace. And we have a lot of, open up your garage door. You don't have to see your neighbors, right? Like, you don't have to do that if you live in a house. But it feels like in an apartment living that you have some natural opportunities to integrate people and then some intentional ways to do that. And that's just has all the benefits. And then if you know the people you live next to, I read something that said the obvious truth that life is better if you live close to your friends. And it's like, that just makes, and the closer they are, the better it is.
Sure.
And so I would imagine having that community that kind of cares for one another and just checks in. You know, has anybody seen Steve lately?
Right.
Could be a great benefit, especially if you have some longevity there.
Yeah.
Those relationships.
Right. Yeah. The Harvard Terrace was built in the 50s. And there are sidewalks. I mean, that's one of the things we tell people as one of our amenities is we're wide open. There's a lot of place to walk. It's almost like a natural walking trail. We have a dog park, but we are dog friendly, and there's a ton of people with dogs. So a lot of people are just naturally meeting each other, walking around the campus.
Yeah.
It's almost 10 acres. So they're well designed with several of the buildings have courtyards.
Okay.
So when you go out your front door, there's two or three other buildings, and also you're coming out your front door and you're naturally walking on the same sidewalks. So there's these natural meeting points that aren't forced.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you that the more you have people like interacting, that also promotes safety. I love neighborhoods that have sidewalks, and you said big front porches, because you just have these interactions that you don't have if you're isolated in the backyard.
Yeah. And so I think as we think about affordable housing and the cost of, we don't have enough housing. We don't have enough in our community. We don't have enough affordable housing. I mean, I think Jeff told me like we're 6,500 affordable units behind. And more than that, just regular units. And so how do we as a community, and this, okay, I'm going to ask this question, like, how do we as a community close that gap, right? As a community, not with these outside entities, because I think that's part of the problem. But like, now you have other projects that you've kind of worked on. So tell us about some of the other things besides Harvard Terrace.
Yeah. I guess you could call me a developer, and because I've gotten into I built a vacation home, and then I built a retail in Tennessee, and we also managed some retail here in town. But I also got started on this other mixed use project that started with an apartment complex in the Pearl District called Quincy Park. And it was the first micro unit development in Tulsa. Actually, I think in Oklahoma.
Micro unit, tell me, like
micro unit, there's like studio apartments. And so there seemed to be this need. I mean, we talk a lot about affordable housing. Well, construction costs have just ballooned, especially after COVID.
Yeah.
So it's harder and harder for people to build something that's affordable unless they get outside assistance.
Okay.
And even with that, it's hard.
Yeah.
It was a bear of a project, but I was really passionate about it because the worst thing, and we get into this habit of, this building is run down, let's tear and build something new. Well, typically what happens is there's no affordable housing after that. The greenest form of construction is saving what we have. And, because we don't build it like we used to. Our wood's not as strong as it used to be. And these were absolute tanks of buildings that it's like, we have to save these. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen here for another decade. So we saved these 5 buildings, and we just started moving people in a couple months ago.
Okay.
And there's a need for it because it's close to downtown. It's workforce housing. It's a lot of people that work around downtown, but they can't afford to live close by, so they're having to drive 30 minutes from apartments that they can't afford, or they're considering options that are substandard housing. They've got, it might be a landlord that lives out of state. They're not taking care of their units, but people can't afford to move out of those once they live in them. So it's just, we're in this predicament, not overnight. It's happened over many years.
Yeah.
And it's hard to kind of catch up. I won't get into what I think some solutions are, but there are some hopeful signs.
Yeah. So in the Pearl District, so these micro units. So like you said, just like people who are working downtown, so they might be working at like restaurants downtown or all sorts of various other things. They're just, and I think about like how much money that could save them, just transportation, right? Just your gas bill, your other such, wear and tear on your vehicle, all those things, and time wise, I mean, I live close to where I work, which is great because it's like, it's like, oh wait, I can run home. Where the water is out in this building right now. So it's like, if I needed to for a reason, like I could go home and take care of things if I had to, right?
Yeah.
There are just so many benefits. And then I think about, gosh, instead of that 30-minute commute, I can be home, with my kids, in 5 minutes. And I get 25 minutes, as a family, that I want to get otherwise. So I like this idea of living close and being there. And so that's the gift that we're giving them, right? That you all are giving them, in a building with character, which I think is always fun, like to meet, to think through that. But developing is hard. I mean, I've never built a building, thought about building a building, other such stuff. So, because what are some of the challenges that I may not think about? I mean, okay, cost prices, I know going in,
Yeah.
but what are some of the things that, to refurbish a building or to repurpose a building that the normal person doesn't think about? That just is a challenge.
Well, I think if you don't have unlimited funds and you're relying on a lot of different funding options, there are just so many variables that these projects take a long time. Again, COVID interrupted this latest one, but you just have these unforeseen risks that, especially with old buildings, you don't know what you're going to find. So when you start digging into it, and so that changes the budget a little bit. Well, you're relying on some bank financing, some other financing, there's deadlines. So the costs make it harder, but also the unknowns. I mean, that affects costs, but anytime you drag something out, there's just, the longer it takes, the more something can go wrong. So that tends to happen too.
Yeah.
I mean, just like, you want to get it done as quickly as possible, but you want to do it right as well.
Yeah.
So you got to there's just this great balance of a lot of different things.
Okay. Yeah.
That would be one thing, is you just don't, especially with adaptive reuse of buildings, you don't know what you're going to find.
So you open up, it's like, you open up a wall and who knows what might be.
Well, or you'll tear down a wall, you don't know what you find. It's like, oh, we didn't expect that, didn't budget for that, didn't budget for the time for that, so it can kick the project down the road a little bit.
Yeah, and then you got all these different people coming in and all trying to do that. Now, what? So from a like city perspective, or county perspective, or state perspective, or national perspective, like regulations, assistance, like what makes it, what is our government, whatever level, do well to help somebody like you? What are some of the things that, that some of the red tape that you have to kind of, what makes it more challenging?
Yeah, there's a lot of different options for getting assistance for development. Some of them are easier to jump through the hoops than others. I think there is a focus in Tulsa on trying to push forward more affordable housing, and there's a revolving affordable housing fund that they've launched out there, and it seems to be working well.
So as a developer, you could apply for this and they would help with whatever it might be towards the project. Okay.
Yep, it helps, like bridges the gap. Like a lot of projects, they just don't pencil out. Like financially, it doesn't make sense to start this project. We'll help fill that gap, is what a lot of like this revolving affordable housing fund does.
Okay.
And it's focused on the IDL and neighborhoods. They just expanded it to neighborhoods around downtown. So that's helpful. And then there are other things like Section 8 housing and things that some of it was just taboo for a while, but that kind of made the requirements for the most part more developer friendly, because sometimes they make it really hard for a developer to meet their criteria and also continue to meet that criteria for decades when you don't know what the future holds in 10 years. So they're making that a little bit more accessible.
Okay.
Challenge-wise, permitting is still a mess in the city of Tulsa. And so much so that, I mean, one of the mayoral candidates this year, one of her top items to focus on was permitting. I mean, that's unheard of. For like a top 5, here are my bullet points about permitting. And everyone's like, what? I mean, obviously homelessness is a huge issue for anybody in a lot of cities around the country. That's a big topic, but permitting. But they're related because so many projects are taking forever because it's just hard to work through the red tape of the city.
Yeah. And again, I there's all these, my wife and I were having the conversation. I don't remember what it was. And it wasn't anything related to housing, but it was just like, well, there are these regulations for a reason, but sometimes the reasons just are outdated, unhelpful. There, the unintentional consequences, or just I don't even know. Like there's that they don't make sense to be helpful, especially when we are at, again, this what seems to be a crisis thing. Because if the options are either develop into affordable housing, which is an overwhelming need, and that if we get affordable housing taken care of, I would think that helps with homelessness in a significant way. It just sets a domino of goodness instead of the opposite, right? Which is just a domino of destruction. Um, but it does do that. So I'm going to ask you for a solution, and like, what could the city do to make things more? I mean, they have this development fund, which is great, right? What are some of those permits that just like, this doesn't make any sense? I'm putting you on the spot, so just
so one of the, I think a solution for it is the some of the things that require permitting are very simple, and it's as simple as like there's so much that you have to go into the city to City Hall, which is not easy to get into. First of all, you've got to figure out parking to get it down there. That's an impediment, and then you got to go through security at City Hall, which is a hassle. This is all taking time, right? And then you get in there, and there's just so many applications when some of them are very simple. They can be streamlined. And so a proposal on the board was, let's take a lot of those simple things that are, jamming up these lines, move them to a different location that's easily accessible, that's centrally located. So people are coming in and they're getting whatever, a permit for a new driveway expansion. So they're processing a lot of those a lot quicker, and it's relieving the clog at City Hall. I mean, I think it's a simple fix, but it would have a lot of a real big positive effect on permitting and the processes.
Well, you say that. I have a friend who works at City Hall, and when I went to visit him, it was like, I mean, all those things. Where am I going to park? Where do I enter in? Oh, security. Who am I seeing? Yes, they know I'm there. And just and just even like, again, for me driving downtown. I mean, I'm such a midtowner now. It's like go down.
I know. It's like, oh, mentally it's a roadblock.
And there's a book I read years ago. I need to reread it, called Nudge.
Yeah. I've read that great book.
Oh, and it's just like, why do we have all these barriers? And one of the things I remember about Nudge was talking about like how easy it is to get to an email list, how hard it is to get out of an email list, right? You put your name on a list and you're on there forever, unless you call in and say, I want to cancel this on Tuesday, but not on Wednesday. I mean,
right.
And so what I'm hearing you say is like, there are a lot of barriers, just from a very pragmatic standpoint, to go and do this, to get some of these paperwork, some of this stuff just taken care of. So it's just a little easier.
Yeah.
And a little more user friendly instead of like office friendly. And I know that, again, there's reasons why we do what we do, but if we are trying to solve a local problem, we need all the local solutions as possible. That's what I think. And so that's really, I had never thought about it, but what is it? Just, you have to be able to park, walk in, get what you need, simple, and walk out, and efficiency in the midst. Instead of thinking, I'm going to spend 2 hours maybe to try to figure out what I'm doing.
There are some big things to overcome in the city of Tulsa as well. We are a very spread out city that spreads your costs out. We're not a very financially solvent city as well. So that hampers a lot of progress. And so you've got a city government that is stretched thin. They're not compensated. A lot of them are not compensated. The way that they entice people to work there, this is just a personal opinion, is the schedule is pretty rigid. It's not extremely demanding. It's stressful, but you got a lot of holidays. It's not like when you're done for the day, you hang it up, you go back, you're done for the day. For a lot of entrepreneurs, it's not that way. And a lot of businesses, it's not that way anymore. Our culture is pushed that way. So with that, there also comes, I think, another thing, working for the city or any sort of position of power is a almost like a perk of the job. So there does tend to be this I'm not going to say corruption, but people take that power a little too seriously sometimes. Instead of putting the community first, they get into these roles sometimes where they feel like, I'm in control, so I'm going to wield my control instead of doing what's best for the community. And I understand too from the other side, because this is coming from a developer.
Yeah.
I understand that in developers, a lot of them have a bad conception as someone that is greedy, and there are a lot of, just like any other profession, there are greedy developers. So you do have to hold the line against this people that are trying to make a lot more money than they should, versus the people that are trying to do honest work to develop for the good of a city.
Yeah, and I do, it is this power. And again, I'll tell a story about another community, and I'll have one about Tulsa about that kind of power. But we moved to a house that was a brand new build. But it had not had its final clearance from the city. So the person that we were renting from at the time, he said, you can move your stuff and you can't stay there. So we go in. I'm a new pastor in this new community.
Mm-hmm.
We move in. I have 20 people, which is it's one of the benefits of being a pastor is if you move, you have a ready-made base of people who will help you to move in, which is amazing, right? Yeah. So I move in. We unload the church. We unload at the house. We get things set up. We go stay somewhere else. And then 2 days, we're starting. We're moving in. We're just not staying there. We're putting stuff up. So then I get a call from the landlord, and he says, the city person said there could be nothing in the house. And there are 2 things that had to be fixed, 2 things on the punch list. Mm-hmm. Neither of them were safety related. I mean, right. So, and it was ridiculous. So we had to call our, like, hey, we moved everything into the garage. Mm-hmm. Luckily it was a 3-car garage, so we could get most of our stuff in there. Right. The guy, the city permit person came in. I saw him leave because my wife, her act of rebellion was to leave the little shelving paper. She's like, I'm going to leave that in this. We were there and I was making sure everything was good. I left. I saw the city permit guy pull in. So I knew what time he came. Yeah. 7 minutes later, I get a call from the landlord. He says, you guys are good to move everything in. Yeah. It's like for 5 minutes of his time and power. Again, being a pastor, being somebody at the church, I had people calling the city government. And this was Mustang. And so I knew people of influence. Mm-hmm. And this permit person was like, yeah. This is, and again, we have regulations, we have permits for a reason, protect people. If not, people would take advantage of all sorts of stuff. But how does it really serve us? Mm-hmm. And I think it's just worth us asking, because if not, I mean, gosh, yeah, we tear down these buildings, and somebody builds something maybe eventually, or they hold on to the property and sell it, or somebody pays cash for it who lives out of state and they don't care. Right. And so, yeah, it's just interesting to think through.
Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of different theories about, why we're so behind on affordable housing. I think in Oklahoma, I talked about just the way we're laid out, we're flat. It's easier to just build instead of rehab. So we keep expanding. It stretches our infrastructure and servicing just basic needs of people, whether it's water, sewer, and just roads, that kind of stuff. Our roads aren't great here. So that's part of it. But I think we don't invest in our, you talked about just some porch communities. If you invest in what's around you a lot of times, then it has a greater multiplier effect than if you're spending it elsewhere.
Okay.
That's part of it. But there's a lot to fixing this. And I think the city is trying, and I think it would be great if they had just a director of common sense, like for for your instance, it's someone, and it's like an ambassador that represents people coming in that actually works for the city, but it's like, look, let me help you navigate these channels of the civic bureaucracy. And so I think there's some more of those roles popping up that we absolutely need. It's like someone that helps navigate for senior citizens, getting welfare. Yeah. And social services, and because it's so layered and complicated, it's like, how am I supposed to figure this out?
Yeah. And obviously my world's like church, and we have our own language sometimes. And I think about, coming into where oh, we have words for things that we know what they mean, but they don't know
Mhm.
what they mean. And I think the same thing is true. And right with the city, you don't know what you're dealing with until you have to. I mean,
Mhm.
and so I mean, and most people don't wanna you don't want to go down to City Hall. And but I mean, and again, I know some people who work in the city, and I think there's this desire to make it user friendly.
Mhm.
Um, and so one of my friends who works there, he talked about they've done some user experience kind of stuff, but again, there's so many areas of that. And then I don't know, so like there's city government, there's also county
Yeah.
government, state government, federal government. Like as a developer, is it mainly you're dealing with city stuff, or what are the different levels that you have to deal with?
Yeah. So mainly city stuff,
Okay.
but one funding source I found for Quincy Park was a national. We got it listed on the National Register, and we're able to use historic tax credits to rehab that building.
Okay.
And the great thing for the city of Tulsa is it doesn't cost them anything.
That's awesome.
So they're all for those type of projects because you don't have to find the money to help benefit the city.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to deal with the state historical preservation office, which can be cumbersome at times. But they take the lead on it, and even in whatever they recommend to the Department of the Interior is what happens.
Okay.
So they just take their lead. So that was another group we still deal with. I think that's probably. I mean, the Quincy Park was a public-private partnership.
Okay.
I mean, I worked with the Tulsa Development Authority, which now is Partner Tulsa. So it's a great name, and they're trying to clean up the bureaucracy of it. They've gone through a lot of changes in the past year. But the name Partner Tulsa is kind of this role that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Someone that's helping developers get things accomplished, working through the red tape, because we need development. It's great for our city, and they help navigate those channels. So
Okay.
that
So
was
partner Tulsa, that's a good thing,
it.
and it's working.
Generally, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now there are a lot of complaints with Partner Tulsa, and like I said, they've completely changed their leadership over the
Okay.
past 6 months.
Okay.
But they're trying to get less bureaucratic, smaller, more efficient. I think in the long run, they combine a bunch of different agencies into one, and that takes time with the government.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, then again, there's all these. I mean, I think with a lot of people, because it was very fascinating to me that, like, homelessness is was one of the major things in the mayoral campaign.
Yeah.
And why is that? And what I think was, and I think maybe it was Sarah who told me this or something, but it really is we know there's going to be homelessness downtown, right? We know there might be, there's these pockets where we drive by and we expect to see it. But when people were seeing it close to them, that then it's like, oh, now it's
You're right.
right? Because it's all politics are local, right? It's my local neighborhood. I appreciate the work that we have at different, nonprofits who are seeing these as people, not, intrusions or other stuff, and relating as people. But again, I think part of what we have to do as a community is try to solve the bigger problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so, talking with Jeff James, I know he's a friend of yours too, that, keeping people in their homes. I mean, that rent assistance, because life happens to all of us. So,
Right.
and not everybody has that ability to take that, medical leave and not, I have people who are like, oh, I wasn't, I was off of work for a while, and that was okay. And that's great, but some people can't afford to do that. They're out 2 weeks and they're out.
Suddenly they're behind on all their bills.
Yeah. And they can do everything right, and you just can't overcome that. And so, and then so some of that is that rent assistance and people like you who keep the rent the same, and that care about people locally, that it's not just another thing. But then we do need, again, I'm really interested in this development. So Quincy Park, you all are wrapping that up from a development standpoint, and then there's just the running of it, right? What's next? What do you see? Well, I mean, you may not know what's next for you, but what do you like? Where do you kind of imagine next to be for you all?
So I'm always evaluating new opportunities, and really just finding I love adaptive reuse. And that's what Quincy Park was taking something, I find beauty in buildings and turning and bringing life back into them.
Mm-hmm.
So once we get stabilized up there, we've started leasing, first 2 of 5 buildings, and we're finishing up construction on the 5th.
Okay.
So once we get all the construction done, and once it gets stabilized, which will probably take another 6 to 8 months, um, it's rare. I mean, generally there's developers and then they develop and sell, or there's managers and they take a property and they just manage the property, or someone buys it as an investment, which happens a lot in Oklahoma. We're a small company, but this is our second big apartment complex. We develop and then we run.
Okay.
So that's what we're doing in Quincy Park. I'm going to run it.
How many units do you anticipate when you get finished?
So there'll be 72 units there.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's an area of need. We're trying to build density in the Pearl District. There's a lot of great older homes, craftsman homes over there, but there's not a lot of affordable housing options that are close to downtown.
And about how much rent? What's kind of the range of rent there?
The rents are about $800 to $1,150, but these are all inclusive units as well. So, kind of through this, the way they were designed, and I won't go into the specifics. We couldn't separate out like the electricity, so it's like, well, in the apartment world, all bills paid can kind of be a negative connotation. Like generally, those are complexes that are more run down and people are looking on a fixed income to live there. Well, it just worked out that we are including all the utilities there. And utility prices have just skyrocketed as well. So the nice thing about Quincy Park, and unlike Harvard Terrace, is what you get when you move in there. There's no extra fees.
Okay. So, and I think that, in my conversation I had with Tina with Family Promise, because with what they try to do is families, they're kind of a short-term sheltering 3-5 months, and then finding that she was saying it's hard to find a unit for a family that's $900 a month. I mean, and I wonder how much people are paying for, especially people who've been paying their mortgages 15-20 years or whatever the case. They're able to get quite a bit for $1,000 a month, right? Or whatever it is, compared to a new house, what that might be, or a lot of apartments. So that does seem, an affordable unit for somebody who's working, and who's making things there. And then especially, not having that, how much is my electricity? How much is my water? How much is all those other sort of stuff?
Right. And I know there's a couple of other, affordable housing developers that are working in projects in kind of around downtown in those neighborhoods that, the challenge I think is in our culture, everyone's trying to make a quick buck, and that's natural. I get it. But it's harder and harder to do as a small guy. And what is easier is just to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to stick to doing this for a long time. And the longer I do it, the easier it is. And you can build up your portfolio where you can get away with not hiking up rents, exaggerating your rents. And, but it takes time. It's just, there's no quick buck out there. Usually, like, if you follow that process of trying to make a quick buck, it's eventually going to catch up to you.
Yeah.
So, it's just basic principles, like treat people right, and so that'll pay off in the end. There's going to be some hard times. Like we have had hard times at Harvard Terrace when leasing was tough. That's not the case now. I think just because we've stuck through a lot of challenges where we have a waiting pool to get in.
That was one of the things. I'm guessing that when you opened your first up at Quincy Park, it filled up just immediately. Or
it is filling up pretty quickly. This is not the best time to be leasing apartments. Generally, our season starts around March through August, and it kind of coincides with the school year as well.
Okay.
So a lot of people aren't moving during December. So
I guess,
it's just holidays stuff. At the beginning of the year, it starts to pick up.
Yeah.
And it really heats up as you kind of finish the school year and get into the summer, and people are looking to get in place before the school year. That's generally how the prime leasing season.
Okay. Well, it makes sense.
The demand is definitely there for these type of units, though, because there's not a lot of these micro, like studio apartments,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in this part of town, that are affordable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, and I mean, that would be, I mean, yeah, getting in that, being able to have that stability, being in a neighborhood. I mean, Pearl, a good neighborhood close by. I mean, there's just a lot of value and benefit that would be there. So like, so you grew up. Well, we'll talk about just kind of a little bit of your story. So you grew up and you saw this modeled with your parents who owned this unit, ran Harvard Terrace. Like, what did you learn as a kid that just kind of shaped and formed you as this kind of, I'm not gonna say like benevolent property owner, because you're still providing for your family, you're still making money, you're making money, but you could be making more. You could be doing business in a different way that might be better financially for you. So like, why is that? Like growing up, what did you see? What did your parents teach you?
Yeah, I think there were many instances where I grew up around it as a kid, and also when I got older into high school and college, I would still see I would help out with some decision making in apartments. And this goes back to just treating people right.
Yeah.
And I mean, most people have a conscience. I was raised well, I guess you could say, where you just know what's the right decision and what's the wrong decision, especially when you're interacting with people. I think it's the connection of being involved in business.
Okay.
And you actually see humans.
Okay.
And I think that's a problem that's developed again in COVID, as you mentioned, like the loneliness, that people are isolated and they're just doing business on a computer and they don't actually interact with people. You're missing a lot. You're missing that human interaction. And I think at Harvard Terrace, because we are small, we're forced to be efficient. Like everyone kind of takes up, wears many hats.
Yeah.
So, my dad's not opposed to just walking around picking up trash around the property.
Yep. Yeah.
And so there's that work ethic where it's like, I'm not above doing something for this property for the greater good of our entire group.
Yeah.
So I think that has impacted me.
Okay.
And that's what we look for too. And we don't hire that often, but when we do is like, we tell them, it's like, hey, here's your role, but we're also may ask you to do some things that you're not typically used to doing, just because everyone pitches in around here to help out.
Okay.
So I think that's been beneficial to kind of just visualize, and when you work in it for every single role, you understand what everyone else is going through as well. You want to help out where you can.
Okay. So yeah, now you said something very interesting at the beginning of that answer. You said interesting things later too, but the beginning that you were part of decision-making processes as a teenager. Like, so I have a 15-year-old, 12-year-old, like, so that is just, this is more of a parent question. Like, well, tell me more about that. I'm just curious. Tell me more about like, what was that decision-making? How were you brought in? What did that do to you as a teenager?
Well, I mean, if I'm over there and we're having like an apartment meeting, kids are smarter than you think. And they also, like, a lot of times they haven't been, I don't know, corrupted by the rat race of a world sometimes.
Yeah.
So sometimes you hear some opinions like, that kind of makes sense. So, if it's, I even get this from my 12-year-old is the oldest and kid-wise in our family, or our 9-year-old will volunteer some information where you're like, yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah.
So, whether it's, sometimes emotions can get involved with running a property, and if you take those emotions out, you might get a good response from someone that is not as emotionally involved, or says, I think the right thing to do here is this. So, it's also a fresh perspective is valuable where, if you work in a business for a long time, you can be kind of hardwired to do certain things.
Yeah.
If you awareness is a really valuable tool for any person in any industry, and just sometimes to step back and realize, hey, you know what? Just because we've been doing this way for so long doesn't mean we should always operate that way.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think that's what kind of the younger perspective gives you.
Okay.
Now I can be cynical about the younger generation as well. managing a lot of employees that are from that generation in
Mm.
Knoxville. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is just, I mean, one of the things that, again, it goes to this loneliness. It goes to this, are we, how do we engage with people who are different than us, whether it be age or race or whatever it might be, that just, can we be open? Can we also have our areas of expertise? Can we have our areas of knowledge? But to deal with that. And I do think just I mean, I, as a pastor, my kids, they come to work with me, they come to church with me, and on Sundays, they see what I do, not just preaching, but other things. And they have this sense. And I think that there is a gift of like, alongsideness, right? I mean, so that's, that your kids, there's a alongsideness that when we expose our children to things, it is not as shocking when they get out there and they've never seen the boss pick up trash, right? They don't, this is just what we do. Okay. Like one of the things we'll say, like in our family, we do X. So, it's like in our family, we don't say shut up, like, now that doesn't mean that if your family does, we think you're the worst people in the world, because just in our family, that's what we do.
Right.
And in our family, we listen to it, we do these different things. And so this alongsideness, right, just developed you, right? You're passing that on. And then you help to, hopefully, they are able to be like, okay, yeah, I see people. I don't see the resident in 8C, it's Mr. Jennings or whoever it might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And two things there is, one is people learn differently. Some people learn through observation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this osmosis, which I think I gathered a lot from just being around how a business operates and seeing, rather than someone telling. It's like, this is how you do this. Well, if they see it in operations, oh, I see how that works. So I think that is really valuable. A tool for people to pick up on. Is this osmosis learning alongside us. I definitely think it's valuable to as much as you can involve your kids and seeing how you operate from, just interacting with people. I think is really valuable. So, bring your kids to whatever you can. I think it's very valuable. And I mean, from a manual labor perspective, I'm thinking about incorporating my kids as much as I can just into the apartments to learn that skill, that hard work, work ethic. And so it's really, really valuable, I believe.
Well, and to get just my kids, and like my oldest, he has a YouTube channel, and there are many people who've made lots and lots of money on YouTube being content creators. But if that's a model they see, this is what I do. They don't see, you see the finished video, it's like, even with this, like, Brittany and Micah, they're going to take this conversation and they're doing the hard work of like kind of editing this, making sure the sound is good, like you don't see all the other things that go alongside with this. And so to expose our kids to behind the scenes, to show them more of what there is, I think, no matter what the profession might be or the calling might be, just to be able to just see. And I had that gift. I mean, so we both kind of are in our family business. My dad was a pastor, and there are a lot of things that's just like, I realized like that came natural to me in terms of ministry. Just because I was like, oh, people are, we need another table out. Well, that's because I've been at enough potluck lunches where it's like, we need another table out. I'm looking for, do we have enough tables and chairs? And I'm like, I mean, you don't do that unless you.
That natural was just learned over time. Just from being present.
Yeah. So that's, I think for you and just bringing your kids, I think it's just a great thing. I'm curious about, again, the landlord experience. Because Tulsa's an easy evict city. I think they told me that earlier. So just walk me through the emotions of eviction. Both, tell me about a time that you walked somebody through that went well, and then, I mean, if you want to tell me about a time that it didn't go so well, like, the emotion, the human side of that.
Yeah. So I think we were talking earlier about the last thing we want to do is evict someone. The flip side of that is, we do love to work with people. Like, let's find a way to make this work so that you can stay and live here. And using, showing them grace on when they pay. We have some people that, because of how their work and pay schedule set up, they have to pay twice a month. Now we don't sign people up and say, hey, yeah, you can pay whenever you want for the month. But some people have kind of worked into that arrangement. And as long as they stick up, they're into the bargain, then yeah, we'll work with you and support you. So, through COVID, this got really difficult for people to, we didn't have a ton of people, but we were relying on, or our residents were relying on COVID assistance from a place like Restore. And it worked well. And Jeff will tell you, because we've had phone conversations about this. Some people are habitual, um, um, I don't know what the word is, but
they have habitual emergencies.
Yes. And so it's kind of like kids. Sometimes you want to teach them and show them grace. And so they've made some mistakes. All right, well, look, here's what we need to do differently this time. We'll work with you this time. But, when those people keep coming back, like, oh, why is this still an issue? Like, we've got you back on your feet twice now. And so now it's kind of seemed like this isn't really, it's never going to be stabilized. And the challenge with a small business is when we do that, when we work with someone, it does require a lot more time. I mean, time is valuable when you're so small as a business. A lot of time and effort that we could be dedicated to other people and other markets or business are being spent on someone that's a hard case. And we're willing to do that sometimes, but if you're going over and over again, it's like, this isn't working. So we're going to have to go through the process and evict. And our eviction rate is really low. The other thing is, I think it's really important, is on the front end is we do background checks. So just making sure that when people are moving in, they can actually afford what they're moving into.
Okay.
So, in the apartment business, sometimes you'll get someone that comes up and like, I need an apartment in 2 days. And red flags start going off. It's like, why? First of all, and we understand people go through stuff, but everyone has to go through, the same application process. And sometimes it's just not the right fit. You might want to live in an apartment here, and it may be attractive from a rent perspective, but if you habitually can't pay rent because of other things you have going on, then it's probably not a good fit for you.
Yeah. So and I would imagine, because you care about the community, it's like, who's going to be, their neighbor, right? Like, that they need to be a good neighbor. And I mean, we all have had bad neighbors, and
sure.
And so, you care about that kind of community as well. It's not just, I can help this one, but what's good for the community as a whole.
Right. Yeah. And you don't want to put people into an apartment complex that, there's a lease to sign, and when you sign that lease, you're agreeing to, be a good neighbor, essentially. And so if you're coming in, you're loud. There's some things you can do in your apartment that are appropriate for the people that you live around. If you're messy, if you smoke, just things that like make it an uncomfortable or really unlivable experience for the other people. Well, that's not what we agreed on with the lease. So we give people an opportunity, like, this is a lease violation. You need to correct this, or you can, you can't live here. So this is the contract, business contract.
Well, there's always this like tension, right, between what's good for the community, what's good for the self, right? I mean, that was from a people watching perspective. Like, whenever, like, going through COVID, okay, there are things that are what's good for individuals is, what's good for the community. How do we balance those things? How do we balance what's good for this person or that person? And to be able to see all that kind of in real time was again painful at times, right? But also interesting at other times to think through. Okay, how do we have these conversations? So I'm obviously a pastor. So what advice would you give pastors or faith leaders about like relating to apartment complexes? Like, what could we do because we're half a mile from you all. But what would be some things that Christ Church on Harvard could do that would be like, we're good neighbors for people at Harvard Terrace?
Yeah, I think, I'm sure you guys, I mean, I don't want to assume, but I'm going to, I'm sure you are open to people coming into your church, to new people. And I think it's good for people to be involved in where they live, to be involved in the community around them. And so that works both ways. I think it's, I'm a believer and I go to church. I wish I went to church closer to my home, honestly. But I understand why we don't. Um, but I think it's good that the to support the community around you, and I think that involves churches, that involves retail, that involves housing, and so I think they just coexist together because you want to be good neighbors because you want to enjoy the neighborhood that you live in or you work in or you have a church in.
Yeah.
So I think it's reciprocal, like being open to people coming in and also being supportive of like for instance at Harvard Terrace we try to support retail institutions around us by if we have move-in gifts we go to the popcorn popper and buy popcorn from them because I think a good town, a good community has is a lot of healthy parts of it. Like we just talked about, healthy churches that are supporting.
Yeah.
Because churches like you guys serve functions that a lot of that are unique to businesses, quote, and housing communities, and all of them have to coexist together for the healthiest communities. So, I mean, as far as specific, is just
Well, I was just thinking, and maybe I'll interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, but like, if y'all had a Christmas party, could we help? What do we help with the Christmas party, right? Or since you don't have a common gathering space, maybe something during the spring or fall or summer that it's not 20 degrees outside,
right.
What does that look like? You talked about moving gifts, like what does that look like to have, to help out with that?
Yeah,
like we want to welcome people into the neighborhood, and just say, hey, welcome to the neighborhood. We're here, and we want to say, hey, to do that. Anyways, I'm just, some of those things. How do we help to foster, community in your own space because you have some natural things?
Yeah,
I don't know. I was just has me thinking about some stuff.
yeah. So, sometimes we've made pushes to put out newsletters in our community, and we're probably trying to do that a little bit more. And so if there are events that are like a local church is putting on, we would be happy to promote that as well. I know like at our church at Asbury, we have a lot of community events that we welcome outsiders, fall fests, whatever it is. And so it's, I mean, a whole challenge in today's day and age is reaching people. How do you reach people? I'm sure you guys go through this as a church. It's like, how do we spread our message to the community, get people to come in and benefit from what we offer? And that's a big challenge now because there's so many different mediums getting eyeballs and getting people's attention.
Yeah, and it goes through, and I think it was maybe in that like nudge book too, where it just takes a while, right? Like it's not the first time. I mean, now unless there's like a burning need, right? So if I've got a toothache, then I'm gonna call a dentist. So I'm gonna find a dentist.
Right.
I'm motivated to find a dentist. Or if I know, okay, my lease ends in this month and they raise the rents, and I've got to come out, like I'm gonna be looking for that. But again, I live not far from you all. Now most of my life is here at Christ Church on Harvard, so 35th. My boys go to Edison, so I'm heading south more than I'm heading north. But I drive by Harvard Terrace and fair amount.
Yeah,
and like it wasn't until like Jeff introduced us that I was like, oh yeah, Harvard Terrace right there.
it's tucked away a little bit.
It's tucked away a little bit, and I don't have a need to have an apartment, so I'm not really thinking about like So yeah, I think it is hard to get in front of people. And then to like people to trust. I mean, that's one of the things I think church wise and maybe even housing wise is like, okay, are you good? Are you here because you want something from me? Right? Are you going to treat me right? I had a bad experience at church or I had a bad landlord or whatever it is. It's just to build that trust takes time too, I would imagine too.
Yeah. We try to promote, word of mouth is still one of the best forms of advertising. So we give lease bonuses or relief concessions to people if they recommend someone and they end up moving in. And we get a lot of those.
Okay.
We also get a lot of people that leave and come back. It's like, gosh, I didn't know how good it was. Which take great pride in that because if they come back, it tells us it's like, the grass isn't always greener. So, I mean, that's something that we really want. We want people to be talking about how good of an experience they have, because generally it's just, I mean, you know this probably better than anyone. People tend to voice their or review things when they're upset.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get people to go out there and volunteer that they've had a good experience at something. Instead, they're more likely to do so if they've had a bad experience.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that makes, and again, something as personal and as housing, right? That would be, yeah. I mean, if we're content, we're content. We don't, it's like, hey, I got other problems. I got other things I got to worry about. That's really, yeah. Well, it is interesting to think they're just to get from how do we get in front of people? How do we do that? And I really think just for like faith leaders who are watching this, like, yeah, what? I mean, there are these communities of people who, I mean, that are right there, that are our neighbors. And what does that look like? And again, it goes to this obvious truth, like life is better when you live close to people that are your friends, that are good. And I do think for, how do we just elevate connection and relationship? That seems in an isolated world in which I don't have to, I can pull my phone out and I can not have to worry about engaging with this person. Yeah, getting that engagement. Now, so at Harvard Terrace, is there a diversity of ages? What is that like? What is it? What is that like? I guess I should have asked this question earlier, but yeah, what's the mix of, what does that community look like? Or
yeah, it's interesting because we are quadplexes. So, in a building of 4, you're going to see typically, 3 apartments more so than anyone else on the property.
Okay.
Now you're going to interact with people, like I said, in those courtyards, in the parking lots, things like that. But because we've had a lot of people that have been there a long time, we have, I think it's also a function of the style of unit. They're 2-bedroom, 1 bath, but we have a lot of people that have been there 30, 40 years. So we have senior citizens that this will probably be the last place to live before they live in either a retirement home or they die. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people that die there that we take care of them and that's their last place to live.
Yeah.
But we also have a younger crowd, and we get a decent amount of students from TU that live there. It's more affordable than on-campus housing.
Okay.
And because of the nature of it, 2-bedroom, 1 bath, one of the bedrooms is a little bit smaller. So sometimes we'll get someone that will have a couple with a kid.
Yeah.
And that smaller bedroom is the kid's bedroom. So, I mean, we've had up to 5, sometimes 6 people, but that's pushing it for these apartments. So we don't recommend that. So yeah, it's a really good, healthy mix of people.
Well, and again, I just think that makes a community, it takes a village to raise a child. I mean, I think that we do, again, one of the gifts I think of being in a church is like my kids, people who know them, who are all ages, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and that just helps us. Somebody told me, kids will pay attention to the oldest person who will take them seriously, and if that's that neighbor who lives across the way and they know that kid's name or whatever it is, or I think about our young adults, like they just need that. The college kid, how great would it be to have somebody who, at Christmas time has just made cookies, because that's what they've done for the last 50 years is just make cookies, and they bring you cookies.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, this is awesome. So,
right. Yeah. And and a lot of times those interactions if there's a big age gap, from a kid, you get more, authentic interactions from someone that really and the older person just wants to visit. There's no alternative.
Yeah.
So just to take that time to get to know someone and focus, and yeah, you mentioned the phone. Like, phone has distracted a lot of people and has probably affected the younger generation more.
Yeah.
So just having that someone is genuinely concerned with interacting with you, and this is where they want to be present, is with you and not with everything else going on. So I think those are really valuable connections that people can make.
And that could be in any neighborhood, but particularly something like that, or just thinking through. I mean, that's one thing that, what can we do that just creates connections in our community that makes it, an easier, less barriers to be able to do it. So, All right. I like to do kind of finish these conversations with some rapid fire, top of the mind questions.
Okay.
So no pressure. Just yeah, what comes to mind? So, what is your favorite place to eat in Tulsa?
Um, Basque downtown.
Okay. Okay. You're a bit there.
Yeah.
What do you order?
So it's tapas. So the nice thing about it is my wife and I love to go because there's a lot of different options. You can try a lot.
Okay. Okay.
So you don't have to be set on one thing and go in there.
See, I'm a guy who goes like I go to a restaurant for a thing typically.
Okay.
But yeah, but that's I do like going to a buffet. It's like I paid good money for this. I'm gonna have a little bit of everything. So, what is your favorite word?
Mm. Interesting. Well, I use that too much.
Too much. All right, there we go. Favorite sound?
Um, like kids laughing.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, you have three. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. What if I was to go into your house? What would be the most unusual or, using your word, interesting thing I would find?
We went to Israel last spring, right before it got really crazy over there, and we have a really nice kind of memorial to that. We collected some water from the Jordan River, and we have some salt blocks from the Dead Sea. So that little memorial to our trip is probably
That's pretty awesome. Did you go with Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
My wife and I went, gosh, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Yeah. It was such
It was amazing.
amazing trip and just love. I mean, just obviously my world, just lots of spiritual stuff and all sorts of things. Like, oh wow, I'm here, And then I also just loved, I don't know if this is your world. I love not making decisions. It's just getting on a bus and just like, okay, wherever. Nobody's asking me where we're going. Right. Everybody's asking me what do we need to do? Just go. That was just
Was Yoav your guide?
Oh man, yeah.
It was amazing. Yeah, he was great. He's just so knowledgeable and be able to share, connect all the different things. It was great.
Yeah. And just, you just knew he had this pool of knowledge that we were just in the, just in the, just got just a little bit. They just kind of going and going and going.
Yeah.
That makes me ask a different question. Favorite place. What is your favorite place outside the state of Oklahoma to be?
Seaside, Florida.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a new urbanism community that we grew up vacationing on, and it's this idea of new urbanism was like going back to the old days when you could, the idea was like a kid could walk, a 7-year-old could walk and go get ice cream by themselves. It was insane. And there are front porches where you're interacting with people. Now it's expensive down there, so it kind of boxes some people out. But the central theme of it is resonated with me since I was a kid.
Okay. Yeah. No, there was, I don't know the whole story, but in Kansas, was it Kansas? There was some lady who was arrested because her kid went into town, like who was like 5.
So, yeah.
And it's like, golly, I read an article about like these kids in like the 1910s or 1920s who like 6 and 4 who rode horses to Washington D.C. from Oklahoma. I mean, just something absurd,
Yeah.
And there's obviously good reasons why we don't let like kids loose, but also I think there's this book, The Anxious Generation.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've read it or heard about it.
Hate, I think.
Yeah. And like we've taken away some of these, like, why can't our kids like just go in and like they need to learn these experiences, and we've created these anxiety things where I had this super proud moment. My 12-year-old and he's our youngest, and we can go easy on him because he's our youngest, right, and that kind of stuff. And he was wanting something with his class schedule to change for the second semester. I'm like, okay, well you can email the person. No, yeah, you can, you're and like. And he did it, I said, CC me, I helped coach him through it, but like, and like, she was like, thank you for sending such a mature email. He, she did the right thing by reinforcing that behavior, and he did the right thing. And I felt like we did the right thing. And like, and he built that little bit of confidence, right? Like I can do this thing.
Sure.
And that's a really cool thing. If somebody is coming from out of town, comes into Tulsa, where do you take them? What's the second place you take them? It's not the first place. I think the first place is the gathering place, probably.
Yeah,
What's the second
right.
place you go?
Um, I love music, so I love to take them to Church Studio to see the history of the music here in Tulsa.
Okay.
So it's a great museum, and Teresa has done a great job with that.
Okay. Okay.
So live music is I'm a big fan of that, and it's a live music museum essentially.
Okay. Well, I'll ask you this question. Top 3 concerts
Oh.
you've been to.
So we are huge Need to Breathe fans, and we've seen them a bunch of times. So probably we saw them in Huntsville last what was that, May? And I think every one of our kids got a high five from Bear Reinhardt, live lead singer, when he came to the crowd. So that was a big moment for them. My wife and I also like Judah and the Lion, and they played Tulsa Theater this fall. And I don't know when I got these tickets, but we got these VIP tickets, and we went back and we were making like this bracelet. Made this bracelet that was the VIP. So you're making bracelets with Judah, Ryan from Judah and the Lion, and you're sitting there talking. So that was, and the concert was incredible. So those 2, and then my 40th birthday, my wife hired a singer-songwriter to come and play. It was a surprise party and played for me. This guy from Nashville named Austin Jenks, and so that was pretty special.
That's cool. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. What is best book or podcast? Something. What have you been learning from here past year or so?
Well, I've gotten out of reading. I collect more books than I read.
Amen to that.
But I'm starting to get back into it, and I haven't really gotten into audiobooks yet. But I just finished this book called The Comfort Crisis. This was really good.
Okay.
So highly recommend it. It just talks about how, as humans, we've gotten away from some of our we've gotten into this comfort level that's ruining our natural tendencies that have kind of softened us as a species.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's good. And it's a story about this person who decides to go on a caribou hunt, like a extreme Arctic caribou hunt for a month, to kind of relearn what it means to be hungry and really earn what you get and that kind of stuff. It was really good.
That's cool. Okay. Very interesting. What is something you wish you knew 10 years ago?
Let's see. These. Be very protective of your commitments and your time, because sometimes they can get away from you, and before you know it, it's hard to claw that valuable time back. So don't be afraid to say no.
Don't be afraid to say no. Yes. Yeah. I heard somebody. It's like, yeah, when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to all these other things. And so I like to say yes, and it's a hard lesson to be able to do. All right. So my final question, and I steal this one from a guy named Steve Cuss, and he has a podcast called Being Human, and I want to be friends with him one day. So that's why I'm doing this podcast. So maybe he'll watch it and maybe he'll be friends with me. But he asked, when have you most recently felt the most love?
I talking about this time commitment and being pulled in a lot of different directions. Our youngest daughter is our early riser, and it was just, yesterday when she asked me, can I wake up with you in the morning and make breakfast? And I was like, absolutely. Cause typically that's my, alone time. I wake up early and have prep everything for school and then have some devotion time just by myself. But it's like, you know what? Yeah, I'm not going to turn that down. And that's just someone that wants that dedicated time. It was like, absolutely, let's do it.
Yeah.
And so she was next to my bed this morning, and I was kind of sitting in bed, just kind of thinking about things. And she came in. I was like, and when she came in and was ready to start making breakfast and get me up, I was like, oh, let's go.
Let's go. Oh man. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I had uh, that alongsideness.
Mhm.
And yeah, so it's that's such a good thing
Mhm.
to do that. And those are the things like she'll hold on to, right? Like,
Mhm.
we did that. You remember we did that,
Mhm.
Dad? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, I remember that.
Right.
See, yeah. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for
Yeah.
saying yes to this.
Yeah.
There's
For
other
reaching
things.
out. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm thankful for, the work you do to help with affordable housing, to build a neighborhood, a community. And that's what, really, as we think about, every Tulsa is a bunch of micro communities, right? Who've got these overlapping circles that
Mhm.
we found a way to live together. So thanks, Kevin, for what you
Appreciate it.
do.
Thank
Yeah,
you for inviting me.
absolutely.
Thank you.
I'm so thankful for Kevin and people like him. And I actually know recently the city's passed some stuff. So hopefully we can have these private and public partnerships to help our community as we just kind of continue to raise the housing that we need for sustainability here in Tulsa. Next week, I'm so excited because we're going to have a conversation with TJ Warren, who's the executive director of Stand in the Gap. Now, they don't do housing stuff. We're looking in a little different direction, but you'll get to hear TJ's story, and you'll get to hear about the ministry that Stand in the Gap's been doing in Tulsa for decades as they look at ministry to orphans, to prisoners, and to widows. You'll want to hear this story next week. All right, so TJ, what is your favorite Stand in the Gap story? You got 90 seconds.
So the one that comes to mind that really characterizes who we are, I think, is Sarah's story. Sarah was raised by her mom. Her mom was a thief and a drug addict. And so early on, her and her brother were taught how to steal from stores.
Okay.
And so they would go in, steal for their mom. Their mom would sell them. Her mom also would deal drugs and those types of things. So mom was very physically and emotionally abusive their entire life. Sarah grows up. She also kind of follows the same footsteps, and she ends up being incarcerated. Fast forward, she finds Stand in the Gap because we teach a curriculum in the prisons and jails. We can get into that. So she finds Women in Transition, our prisoners program, goes through that curriculum, gets out, gets a Women in Transition team. It's a group of mentors to walk alongside her as she enters back into society. And then finds Jesus, becomes a believer. Fast forward like maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road, her mom is living in Florida and still addicted to opiates and is dying. And she hadn't seen her mom for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Finds out, she drives down to Florida and becomes her caregiver for the rest of her life. Gets her out of bed, cares for her. So that's the story of Stand in the Gap. That's the beauty of the gospel for us. Is that someone who abused me and hurt me my whole life, when they're dying, when I find Jesus, I go down and I take care of you for the rest of your life.
Oh.
And I love you and I care for you. And that was her story. And then, when Jesus saves you, very often that's the type of life that Christians have led for thousands and thousands of years. Is this complete reversal of your abuser becomes the person that you sacrifice your life for. Yeah, so that's a very common story at Stand in the Gap.